Thanks for joining us, especially so late in the day. We have a lot of content to get through, so we're going to go ahead and get started. This talk, as you probably have gathered by now, is about A/B testing. Don't expect this to be a love letter to A/B testing per se. Allie and I really believe in A/B testing as a really powerful tool, but it has its costs. It certainly has its benefits, but it doesn't come for free. And so what we really want to do today is take an even-handed look at what are the strengths of A/B testing as a user research methodology, and what are its downsides. Just by quick way of introduction, my name is Matt Schraan. Oh, yeah, this would help. I was trying to will the slide to advance and not happening. Oh, highlighting A/B testing. So my name is Matt. I lead product management at LiveFront, and my co-presenter today is Allie.
Yeah, hey everyone. Is this working? Okay. My name is Allie. I'm a product designer. Been working alongside Matt for a few years now. We've done quite a bit of A/B testing together. But like we said, we both come from LiveFront. If you want to check us out, there's the website. We are a digital product studio, mainly focusing in mobile, but we do products across the board too. Okay, so for today, just to give you guys a rundown on what exactly we're going to be walking through, I have a little bit of an agenda just to kind of help set us up. So the first thing that we're going to go through together is actually defining what A/B testing is, so we're all on the same page. Then we'll look at the different strategies that are often associated with A/B testing, followed by, of course, the pros and cons. And then, following that, we also have some good and bad examples of A/B tests. And then after that, we will talk about the actual execution process and what kind of best practices look like around that space. And then we'll leave you guys with a few thoughts on how you can get started after today with A/B testing.
All right. So let's start out with some basic definitions. What is A/B testing? Well, one definition, sourced in part by Wikipedia, is A/B testing consists of randomized experiment with two variants, typically an A and a B. It includes application of a two-sample hypothesis testing as used in the field of statistics. A/B testing is a way to compare two versions of a single variable, typically by testing a sample's response to variant A against variant B, and then determining which of the two variants is more effective. So now that we have A/B testing defined, thanks for coming. We're done. No, let's keep going. Okay, so what does this really mean? At least to us, from our perspective, A/B testing is one of many user research tools, but where it particularly shines is that it's a great way to prove causality between product features and outcomes. And so what do I mean by causality? So, you might just in your kind of daily life as an engineer or a designer or a product manager, you might notice your product starts to see a shift in usage, whether up or down. And you might wonder, why is that? Is it because of the redesign we just did? Is it something else? And so where you might observe correlation, that doesn't necessarily mean causation. So say, for example, we just redesigned our app and we're seeing an uptick in usage. Can you definitively say that the reason we're seeing this uptick in usage is because of rounded corners with our new design, or is it something else? And so, very cliche, I'm sure you've heard this before, but correlation does not equal causation. And that conundrum is precisely what A/B testing is really effective at getting to the bottom of. So A/B testing allows you to control for all of these other variables, namely time. So for instance, going back to that redesign of our app and seeing an uptick in usage, well, was there any other factors that were in the air over those time periods? So when you hold time constant, all the other variables are then controlled, and you really can hone in on what is causing this change or this shift. As digital products are living, breathing things, users' interactions and expectations with those products also shift over time. And so users might think of your product completely different 1 year from now than they do today, or than they did 1 year ago. So again, A/B testing, because you're running 2 variants of your product at the same time, you're able to really isolate that cause and effect relationship without getting your results clouded by other things in the air. Another really common one is marketing mix, promotion. So maybe you see like an uptick in conversions, but is that because of something you did on the product team, or is that something your marketing department did with some kind of sale or promotion? And then finally, A/B testing allows you to control for COVID. And this is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but what that really means is that we're living in times where consumer behavior dramatically shifts from 1 month to the next because of COVID or the price of gas or social unrest or all these other things. And so if you're leaving those heavyweight issues aside, if you're just trying to move your product forward, but you don't know what the shifts and the changes that we're seeing, what is really causing it, and A/B testing is a great way to drill into that.
Okay, so now that we know what exactly A/B testing is definition-wise, I put together what it kind of looks like in terms of a visual for us to walk through together. So what does A/B testing look like? Well, if you simplify it down even more, A/B testing, like Matt was just covering, it basically just means that you're testing 2 variants against each other to see which one basically wins against another one. So for this example, I have an A on the left and a B on the right. The only difference between these, though, is the color of the button. So for this example, let's just say that we're trying to test whether or not the button color influences tap-through rates. So if we look at it from that perspective, our A could be looked at as our control group. Now, typically your control group within A/B testing, that's more so something that already exists on your platform or in your app already. So it's kind of like a before state, and you're testing it against an experimental group, which is kind of like the presumable after state of what you think might perform better. One other thing to call out, you don't only have to have 1 experimental group. You can actually have pretty much as many as you want. However, just take into account that the more that you add, either the longer it'll take to find or like discover results. They'll either do that, or they're going to get super watered down, or and this is probably the more important one, at least in terms of the team itself, every single one of these variants are going to be designed and implemented. So it's a lot of cost and time that gets put into these. So keep that into account too if you're doing many different experimental groups. Anyways, back to our example. So let's say for this, we are going to do an A, B, and C. Basically what you would do after you design and everything is implemented, you just kind of sit back and wait and see what happens and just wait for the results to come in. So I have some fake results about to happen. Keep that in mind, this is fake. So you can see here things are happening on the screen. It looks like someone's maybe pressing the button. But kind of what this is talking about is you're able to look at these variants next to each other and understand which one is more successful based on whatever your measurement was. In this case, it was tap through. So our control didn't do so bad. It was at 60%. Our B didn't do very well. It's actually underneath our control, so that one's not a very good one. That one came in at 40. But our C did phenomenally well and got 100% tap through. So that one would be our clear winner. That was our highest performing variant. And that one would more than likely then replace what your before experience was, which was our control group.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the different scenarios where you might look to do some A/B testing. The first one is just imagine that you're a product manager or an engineer or a designer or all 3, and you have a gut feeling, or maybe it's even founded on some prior research you've done, that you say, hey, if we had this feature or this incentive, we could really push things forward in a dramatic way. But to get that, the organization or the company you're with just sees that kind of change as too risky. And it's not going to get funded, it's not going to get budget, so you're sort of stuck. So then what do you do? One thing that you can do is go on offense with A/B testing. And so offensive A/B testing is more oriented towards growing your product or reaching or pushing for positive results. Oftentimes, this could mean user engagement, it could mean conversion, it could mean revenue. Whatever is meaningful in your product or in your business, A/B testing is a way to maximize those results by placing small bets, within the confines of a test, but ultimately reaching for larger results that can scale and then have a very large impact. And so, really, like in this scenario, and in all scenarios, A/B testing is really a risk management tool. Is that this allows us to dip our toes, with this new direction, this new feature, this new incentive structure, but without fully committing to scaling it just yet. And then at the end of the day, answering the question, what kind of results, what kind of outcomes could this drive if we scaled this feature or this variant up to all users? So that's offensive A/B testing. There's another place where A/B testing can be really useful, and also in the realm of risk management, but where offensive testing is more oriented towards reaching for the upside, this would be more trying to cover your downside. So you might say, hey, we've already committed to feature Y, like it's an immovable object, we already have to build this thing. We're worried about what it might do to our user experience or our user retention or whatever it might be. And so A/B testing is a way to defensively de-risk those kind of situations. So, when you've already committed, you've already made the decision to build a feature, and that feature was built on a set of assumptions, A/B testing is a way to test those assumptions, oftentimes to mitigate negative results. So that could mean, abandonment rates in your conversion funnel. It could mean just users losing interest in your app and attriting. It could also mean other metrics in terms of software stability, like does this major refactor or does this new feature or new dependency introduces crashes and other bad software behavior. And so every time you build a feature in your product, presumably that feature is built on or based on some kind of rationale or assumption. And so A/B testing is a way to challenge and test those assumptions and verify that they are in fact correct. Ultimately answering the question, is this feature working the way that we expected it to? Okay, so what are the benefits of A/B testing? Well, the obvious one is that it enables you to drive and measure real business results. By testing and learning, by making these controlled small bets, you're able to really optimize your product, whatever that means to you, whether it's conversion or revenue or engagement or whatever it is. Another benefit is that compared to other types of user research, A/B testing really kind of mitigates the effects of cognitive dissonance. So, it's not to say that like running surveys or doing user interviews aren't valuable tools. They certainly are, but human beings are just notorious for failing to predict their own future behavior. And so what people tell you they're going to do isn't necessarily what they're actually going to do. And A/B testing really cuts to the heart of that in a unique way compared to other types of survey or interview methods. Another benefit, and we've hit on this already, is that as a risk management tool, A/B testing lets you take those kinds of risks, but in a controlled way. So just to give a concrete example, let's say that you're experimenting with, hey, if users sign up for our service, we're going to give them an incentive. Well, A/B testing allows you to control for exactly how many users are going to get that incentive, and therefore you can control the budget, get your sample out in the wild, observe what happens, and then make a decision from there. Do we need to scale this and fund it permanently or not? Another benefit of A/B testing is that the learnings compound on themselves. So you can think of, every experiment that you run, hopefully you're going to learn something, whether or not the test was, quote unquote, successful. But over time, if you catalog and sort of build on what you've learned, your hypotheses get smarter and stronger and stronger. And A/B testing, especially when you do it many times over, that you have this kind of compounding return on those efforts. Another benefit is that it changes the culture of your team. So I don't know if anyone in the room has experienced where they've run an A/B test and they were certain of which variant was going to win going into the test, only to find that variant didn't win, and what they thought was going to happen didn't in fact happen. And so that creates a little bit of inner tension, because we all think that we're smart and we have good opinions on what should happen about our product, but sometimes we're just proven wrong. And so having that happen a few times really then starts to instill this sense of, the truth is knowable, it's out there. It's probably not sitting inside this room with these four walls. And therefore, we need to kind of go out in the wild and find out what's really, really happening. One of my favorite benefits of A/B testing is that because it's so hard to execute, it requires just a little bit more from the team across disciplines. So it requires a little bit more from engineers. It requires a little bit more from designers. It requires a little bit more from product managers. And therefore, the team has to work together better in order to make A/B testing really work. And I've personally found that really fun and challenging in the testing that I've done. The next benefit of A/B testing is that, and this is closely related to the risk, but that when you're, oftentimes I think as product people, we have a clear vision of, okay, what actually can move the needle and drive results for our product, but we might necessarily have the stakeholder buy-in. And so, when you're trying to make the case of, hey, we should permanently make this change or make this shift in our product, you might catch a lot of resistance. One way to make that more palatable is to say, hey, let's just try it. Let's just test and see what happens. And it's a way to really kind of ease those barriers to making big and meaningful changes in the products that we work on. Okay, A/B testing certainly has downsides. Let's talk about some of those. The first one, the biggest one, is that it is very, very expensive. It's not, if you are measuring just based on just feature output, which I'm not saying that's the best way to measure the efficacy of a software team or a software product team, but some people, we know, count for that sort of thing. And A/B testing, you just think about it conceptually, you're throwing away, if you're doing it correctly, you're throwing away half of your designs, half of your source code. And it's not quite that dramatic, but you get the point, is that, we're intentionally taking a step back and developing and releasing something that ultimately we're probably going to abandon, but we're doing so in the hopes of reaching a higher goal. And so while it can be worth it, and we're absolutely here to tell you that oftentimes it is, but it's not worth it in all cases. And if you're going to do A/B testing, you should be clear-eyed about what those costs are. Another downside is that it's really complex. When you have all of these, conditional statements in your product that, if this, then do that, it just increases the complexity by orders of magnitude. It becomes harder to test. It becomes harder to communicate requirements. If you don't do a good job of cleaning up after yourself, which we'll talk later, you can get kind of colliding conditions. And so, it's not like it's as easy as, like some of the A/B testing tools make it sound. Another one is, I think there's a perception out there that, okay, we're going to do A/B testing, and it's like our kind of strategy machine, where we sort of put in some inputs, and then bing, like out comes our decision making, out comes our strategy. And it's just not that. It's an input, and it's certainly a powerful input. It's going to help you make better decisions, but it's not going to make the decisions for you. And so that, these kinds of decisions, especially the big ones, still require, judgment, discernment, synthesis, analysis. And A/B testing just isn't, an automatic strategy machine.
All right, now that we got the pros and cons, let's look at some pros and cons in terms of examples. So before we get into these two sections, I'm going to go through some good examples first, and then I'll go through a couple bad ones too. But before I do, just to kind of help set this up, I created an app that basically sells plants to consumers. So basically, if you want to purchase a house plant or an outdoor plant, you can come to this app, download it, and you can make some purchases for yourself. So that's kind of the setup of all these examples, just so you guys kind of know the realm of where they're coming from. Okay, so let's get into it. For our first good example, this one looks at changes that are low effort but have potential for really high impact. And really by this, what we mean is there something that you can change that is actually relatively small in terms of like changing the design, or even like on the development side? Maybe it's not that big of a change, but it has potential to make super big impact from a user perspective. So think of this one as, if it's an already good experience, you're kind of like raising the ceiling, or if it's a poorer experience, it'd be like raising the floor. But in either case, you are raising the bar, so it's good in either way. So for this one, you'll also notice that I have set up kind of little hypotheses as we walk into them, just to kind of help set up the visuals too. So for this example, if we were to introduce a persistent add to cart button, then we will drive more product sales. So that piece is kind of how our measurement comes into play, because of improved discoverability. So if you look at this one, like we looked at earlier, how we had our control versus our experimental groups, I have that set up here too. So control is on the left, experimental is on the right. So our control is what already exists in the app today, and the experimental is the one that we want to test out. Now this one probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense yet. I do have some scrolling animation happening because that's where the persistence comes into play. So when I go through these, just pay really close attention to that add to cart button. So on the control, we'll look at that one first. As you go through and you scroll down the page, you'll notice that that add to cart button isn't visible from the bottom of the page. So if as you go through and you're shopping for this plant and all the details are there, it's exactly what you want, you actually have to scroll back up to the top in order to add it to your cart. Now, what we want to test against it is this version, our experimental, where as the button scrolls off, the button reappears at the bottom. So no matter where I am at the page, I'm always able to add to cart in the process. For our second example, questions that require scale in order to get a meaningful answer. By this one, what we mean is a lot of times when you're A/B testing, you're not making super noticeable changes, but again, they do make an impact. So just given that, based on scale, you might have to run your test for a longer period of time in order to see the results you're looking for. So for this one, if we introduce a satisfaction guarantee, then we will drive more product sales. So again, just trying to get people to buy more, because of increased buyer confidence. So this one comes to life a little something like this. Control, again, on the left, experimental is on the right. So in our current experience, we have this shipping section. So all of our plants get shipped for free with express 2 to 3 days. So obviously that's a super great benefit. But what would happen if we actually switched that section and repositioned it as kind of like our promise to our customers? What if we had that as our header up there? We still keep our shipping because obviously that's a super great benefit. And then we added this satisfaction guarantee to just up it a little bit more and get buyers' approval. Okay, and then our third one, features that are high effort, but you've already committed to building them. So Matt already touched on this one a little bit, but this is a really great place to look for A/B testing. You might be implementing a feature that is a ton of work, but if your team or stakeholders are already bought into it, might as well just throw it against an A/B test and make sure that your assumptions are validated. Okay, so for this one, if we add support for a new payment method, then we will drive more product sales because it increases ease of use. So for our examples, again, control versus experimental, and the place to focus, there's really only one change happening on these, and it's the buttons at the bottom. So in our control, we only have a single checkout, which obviously takes you to the checkout flow. But what would happen if we added Apple Pay? And I'm sure if anyone has used Apple Pay before, you've noticed how easy it is to make purchases with that. So you can see how that could kind of up the sales of this product if we were to do something like that. Okay, on the flip side, let's look at a couple bad examples. And these ones I'll kind of talk through why they're bad as we're going through them, but they're set up in that same format that we just walked through. For the first one, changes that permanently shift a user's mental model. I'll let you ponder that as we go through. So an example for this might look something like this. If we change our navigation, then our team will be happier because we love hamburger menus, aka the product junk drawer. Anyways, but it stands true. So if you're changing something serious like your navigation of your app, that is a pretty severe change. And actually, if you do something like that, I'm not saying that you should not test that in some way. It's just a matter of A/B testing is probably not the right thing to use. Reason being, one, from a user perspective, if your new variant doesn't perform well, you're going to have to, your users are going to have to retrain themselves to go back to the original if it doesn't perform. So they kind of have to do that mental gymnastics to retrain themselves to go between the two. And on the flip side, navigation is I'm sure any developer here can attest to this. It's not an easy flip to switch between the two. It's a lot of work, which is a lot of overhead and a lot to have to support in one app. So that was a lot, but here's some examples. So our control is on the left, experimental is on the right. You can see on the left-hand side, we are using a bottom navigation with more of a kind of truncated search up top, and our experimental group kind of truncates all of that and pushes it to the top and hides a lot of it underneath that hamburger menu. Okay, next one, ideas that haven't been qualified. A/B testing is not something that should be done as the first step in your validation process across the board. It should actually be the very, very last, because again, you're designing and implementing everything that you're seeing with A/B tests. So if you're throwing any old design out there that's not qualified, there's a very good chance that it's not going to perform well. So you're just basically putting work on your team's shoulders for no other good reason than wanting to do an A/B test. So for this one, if we introduce an in-app personal assistant, then we will drive product sales. So this one has a pretty legit reason for doing it. Because people miss Clippy though. So everyone remembers Clippy from Microsoft. He kind of was always in the bottom corner, there to help you whenever you needed it. So if we bring this one to life in terms of our plant app, control would be on the left where nothing is happening, it's just our normal screen. But we introduce this little like floating fob, and I kind of have it in an introductory state just to help illustrate it out a little bit more. But we introduce this little plant named Planty, and he can help you with all your needs. He's an expert because, you know, he's a plant. Okay, last one here, changes that don't present enough of a difference. I'll touch on this a little bit later in terms of kind of like design best practices around A/B tests. But if your if your control and experimental groups aren't different enough, you're going to run into that same situation I talked about earlier where your results are just not going to come through and they're going to be super watered down. You're not going to know which one performed better. So this one, Matt actually kind of joked about this, but you know, it's fine. If we change our corner radii, then we will settle our internal debate because I, as the designer, I am right about this, and everyone knows that corner radii are better. Subjectively, of course. So this one here, our control is on the left, experimental's on the right. So you can see on the left-hand side, everything is a little bit sharper. We still have some radii though, obviously, because no one really does sharp corners anymore. But one of the big places is in our navigation. You'll notice that the container behind it is all the way across, so there's no radius happening there. In our experimental group, though, you'll notice that everything gets a little bit rounder, including that navigation at the bottom. Now, this would be actually a really good example of something that, instead of doing an A/B test on this is much more of an internal decision. And actually, because we're doing a plant app here, you could easily make the argument that plants are from nature. Nature doesn't have sharp corners. Everything is more free-flowing and natural, so that's why we should change our corner radii. So that should be justification enough. There's no need to actually A/B test that.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some tips and pointers for actually executing A/B tests. So the first one, and we've alluded to this a little bit, is construct a hypothesis. You're going to want to obviously design your test variants, which Allie will talk about. Then it's time to implement those test variants and then interpret your results. So let's break these down step by step. So starting with the hypothesis. This is, in a lot of ways, really the most important part. All of those good and bad examples really ultimately represented good and bad hypotheses. A few of them were just based on kind of personal opinion. A few of them were based on just kind of, you know, irrational fondness for Clippy. But you know, really, you know, not all hypotheses are created equally. And so a well-formed hypothesis forces you to really present a theory about why this change is going to present value, whether it be to end users or your business. So if we kind of deconstruct this if-then-because format, you know, it's really simple, but it sort of forces you to bring three things to the table when you're looking to do an A/B test. The first one, you know, in the blank space next to if, is your independent variable. This is the cause, the thing that you're experimenting with, whether it's a different design treatment, a different feature, a different message, whatever it might be. The then is your dependent variable. This is the outcome that you're trying to drive, whether it be conversions or user engagement or registrations. And then the because is the rationale or the reason why. And so we really like this structure because it forces you to, I got to fill in those three blanks. I have to have a sound theory about all three of those if we're going to do this test. Whether your hypothesis turns out to be correct or incorrect, we very much recommend keeping a catalog of those and state all the rationale that you had when you initially made that hypothesis so that you can refer back to it and the next time around when you're trying to run a test in that same area of your app or product, you can learn from what you've already done before. Okay, Allie's going to talk a little bit about design now.
Yeah, the next part would be then to actually go and design your variants. Now, the very first thing comes from a non-designer perspective, so anyone else on the team that is working on this A/B test with you. This is for you guys. Trust your designer. Your designer actually does have pretty good insight and intuition about what users are looking for. They're not just throwing any willy-nilly idea out there. There are reasons they are testing what they are. So if you can trust your designer, you're in a pretty good spot there. But they're also doing a few things to leverage the work on the developer side too, which if you trust your designer, you should also be able to trust their design. So I have a couple best practices in here just in terms of how you can go about designing an A/B test that kind of reduces that development overhead as you're implementing them into your app. First one being is to leverage your already established design system. For A/B testing, you don't necessarily want your experimental variants to feel any different than the app as it already is. You want them to feel very integrated. And plus, from a developer standpoint, it does make their lives a lot easier if you're utilizing things that are already instilled in your application. So that's the first one. The next one then is to utilize Modality for quick and dirty testing. And what I mean by this is Modality is actually super popular right now, and it really benefits A/B testing, so use that to your advantage. If you use Modality in your app at all, it becomes very easy to swap things in and out and just plug and play as you go, making it super easy to test for like one A/B test or in the future too. Because if you're using Modality, you could easily, like I said, swap things out without interrupting anything else around it. Next piece of advice is to limit your number of variables within the design itself to get clean results. If you change too many things between your control and your experimental group, your results are going to get very muddied and you're not going to be able to pinpoint what exactly it was that actually pushed the lever and made that experience better. Last one here is kind of to counter that a little bit, is to make your variance bold enough to stand out and create that clear separation. So yes, you don't want to change too many things, but you do want to make the thing that you are changing different enough so that your results can actually come through too. Otherwise, they're just going to get lost.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about implementation now. So to implement an A/B test, and really to, what we're talking about now is mainly development. To start with your success metric, have a really clear picture of what outcome or result are you trying to drive. Going back to the hypothesis example, this is your dependent variable, your then statement, your cause. And so have a measurement plan, a written measurement plan that says what metric you're going to drive with this test, and why, and what sample size you need to be relevant or to have relevant results, and then work backwards from that. Sometimes you get into an A/B test and you're like, oh, our analytics aren't set up to so cleanly measure the thing that we ultimately care about. And so, analytics is often an overlooked part of software implementation, but in A/B testing, it's really critical because your data is only going to be as sharp and precise as your analytics implementation is, and that's ultimately what's going to give you meaningful results. Another thing is the thing that enables A/B testing is feature flags, and specifically remotely controllable feature flags. So, runtime switches essentially that says, okay, the software should do this or that, variant A or variant B, no planty or planty. And so this is where things really get complex, especially when you're rolling out a test across multiple platforms at the same time. And so you really want to make sure that your feature flags are controlling what aspects of the experience that you expect them to control, and that there's parity across, if you're testing on iOS and Android and web, that all three of those are in unison and agree about what the feature flag is actually controlling. Testing feature flags is really hard, especially if you don't have good testing and debugging tools. And the last thing is just when you're, most A/B testing frameworks have like a remote configuration component where, so your app is released out into the wild, and then remotely, you're going to start your experiment on one day, and so if your feature flags are hooked up to that remote component before the feature is complete, and you turn it on and you're not otherwise targeting, on the certain versions where the feature is done, then users in the wild are going to get an incomplete thought, meaning a half-baked or half-implemented feature, and your test is spoiled. So really, have a healthy respect and fear of feature flags, and there's a lot that can go wrong with them. So take that, testing really rigorously. Another thing is, and this is more of an engineering topic, which I'm not personally qualified for, but actually in the room, like Chris and Paul have done a lot of A/B testing with Allie and I. One thing that I've heard is, when implementing a feature, oftentimes it's the motivation of an engineer to implement that as efficiently as possible so that we're not creating a ton of bloat in the code base. A/B testing is one sort of exception to that, because if you assume this feature is going to be short-lived potentially, we're going to have a winner and a loser, and then we're going to discard the loser. So rather than find like the most efficient way to like implement like these variables in the same screen or the same view, to just copy it over so that both versions stand up on their own. They're not interdependent on each other. You don't have a bunch of spaghetti code. And then ultimately what that helps is the removal. Because after you're done A/B testing, we very much recommend remove the losing variant so that you don't have all this vestigial testing like sitting around that's going to cause unforeseen complications and regressions later on. So that you bake this when you're considering how much effort it's going to take to implement an A/B test, to consider what it's going to take to remove this feature flag later on, once we've determined our winner and we've scaled our solution up to all users to be more or less permanent. Okay, and then finally, interpreting results. So the first thing to do is to go back to your hypothesis. Go back to that dependent variable. Did it move? What kind of lift did you see? Is that significant? Is that meaningful? That's kind of the obvious one. The other thing is to evaluate just how confident are you in those results. And frankly, a lot of the A/B testing tools that are out there kind of do this for you. There's something called Bayesian Statistics, which is, some kind of high-minded statistical principle that I don't understand, but that determines the confidence level in the results that you're seeing. So, if you saw variant A performed and had a 25% lift over variant B, is that just because of just a freak one-time occurrence, or are those results likely to persist and stick if we scale it up to a lot of people over time? Also, look outside of your hypothesis. Are there any things that were, what would it be? I'm going to mess this up. Unknown unknowns? Was there anything that came up in your test that you're seeing in the results that you didn't anticipate? And oftentimes this is adverse or bad behavior. Maybe you moved the needle on the dependent variable that you were trying to move, but on the other hand, you saw this new feature is causing a ton of crashes. That might be a reason to, hey, maybe we should pause and refactor this and make it stable before we scale it up. So look not just at your dependent variable, but also kind of look holistically at what are the outcomes driven by this variant that we're testing. And then the last one is to deliberate. Like I mentioned before, A/B testing isn't just a pick the winner, automatically scale it. This stuff still requires real deliberation and discussion and analysis, and it's an input, but there's all sorts of reasons why a test can get spoiled. There's all sorts of reasons why you may not scale a change, even in spite of a favorable A/B test result. And so very much use the information that you've learned to inform that discussion, but don't think that just because the result said this, that with no other discussion, that's we're going to scale that winning version.
Okay, I know we're a little short on time, so I'm going to fly through these a little bit faster. But now that you guys are A/B experts, how can you get started? So we put together a couple prompts that if you are itching to get started in this, where can you look at your product today to utilize this methodology? So one question to ask yourself, do you already have a feature in your app that's controlled by conditional logic? If so, you can totally leverage that. So a good example of this would be a first run tutorial. If your app currently has one, what would happen if you took that away? Use that as your experimental group and see what happens. Is your first run tutorial as beneficial as you intended it to be? Second one, do you have a feature in your app with questionable user value? A good example of this one would be exposing a free shipping label earlier. If you've ever looked at a certain piece in your app and thought, I don't know if this is actually benefiting or hurting the user in any way, is this actually necessary? Can we just get rid of it? You can totally A/B test that too. So in this example, something to think about, in that fake plant app that we looked at earlier, we exposed a free shipping, but not until the individual product details screen. What would happen if you push that up a level and it's always present, kind of like prices, as the user is browsing? Would that influence more purchases? And the last one, and this one should look fairly familiar. We've been hammering home on it a little bit. So do you have a feature that you're already planning on releasing anyways? Again, this could really be anything, but as long as you have a before state that's already implemented and you're planning on updating it anyways, test it against your original and see if your results actually do come through. See if your assumptions are validated with A/B testing. And that's it. Thanks so much, you guys. Is there any questions? Yeah. Yes. So yeah. So what you would do is your control group is typically already out there and being used, and then you would design, implement, and ship a new example, and then just divide out like Matt was talking about with feature flags in order to do those type of things. But yeah, it would go out in prod.
Like not exactly A/B testing in the way that we're talking about with Bayesian statistics and statistical relevance, but you can do, prototypes delivered to small samples of users and have different variants of a prototype and see if a preference emerges. And that's a sort of a similar or adjacent concept, right? Because you're testing two things, but it's not, it just doesn't come with the statistical significance piece of it. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So in the testing that we've done, we've used like A/B testing tools that actually do the statistical modeling piece for you. So what we're working on is the hypothesis and the assumptions, but we're sort of outsourcing the analysis to the tool that we're using. Yeah. Yeah, at scale, there are some really sophisticated, A/B testing like organizations that run many, 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 many tests at the same time. And you really, when you're doing that, you almost need to like build your own solution. When you can, just for simplicity and avoiding test collisions, we've found success with just running one at a time, and for all the complexity we talked about with A/B testing, running many tests at the same time just magnifies that quite a bit.
One other thing too is we've never run into this because we typically only do one at a time, but I have also read that be very cautious of running multiple, and different users are seeing multiple too, just because those could influence each other and also influence the results.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it really depends on how big of a sample you need to get a meaningful answer. So if you have a very small user base, you might just want to go 50-50 and just take the entire pie and divide it up between your two variants so you get an answer faster. But if you have a ton of scale, meaning you have a very large install or user base, then maybe you can get away with deploying it to a small subset. And really the key is how many samples or how many cases do you need in order to get a statistically relevant result? And so then, as a percentage, how many users you're deploying it to, it's really a function of that. I see. Oh, you mean like an option for the user, where if you have like two versions, yeah. And I guess that would involve like another layer of design, right? Like if in some way we're gonna like allow the user to modify the UI. But that would be, that would just be then changing your design based on what you learned from a test. Yeah. Yeah, so
especially with a digital product, mood is quite a hard thing to measure. So really all you can do is try to hold all the variables that you can control, to hold those constant. So that, okay, if some users are in a great mood and some users aren't, so that you've got like diversity, whatever that means, demographic or geographic or whatever, so that you're accounting for, like if you're deploying, each version to roughly the same number or sample size of people, that all those things are gonna kind of even out and aren't gonna impact your results one way or the other. So you said mood, and there was another one. What? Yeah. Yeah, and that's actually a good point, is that oftentimes if you just kind of look at your general user base, you might not really see any drastic or meaningful differences. But then if you kind of take things a step further and segment, oh, did I do that? So then if you segment further and say, okay, well, across our general population of users, the results are flat. There's no difference. But let's look at a certain age demographic or a certain kind of geographical region or a certain whatever attribute or trait or way that you might segment your users. Sometimes differences then might arise from that, which is also a great way to learn more about your users. Yeah. Yeah, and this is where you could probably help me answer this question. But for me, in my case, I wait until the A/B testing tool says that I have a Bayesian statistical relevant answer. But I don't make that determination. I rely on the testing tool too. Thanks for the save there. Yeah, and actually one thing I'll add on too is separate and apart from like the statistical piece, knowing your natural kind of rhythms of your user behavior. So like one of the teams at LiveFront right now is like running an A/B experiment on an app that's used to schedule a haircut, and people get haircuts every 6 weeks, 8 weeks. So the duration has to at least be that. Because we just, as great of a haircut as you might get, like you're not going to get one every day or even every week. So depending on how frequently you expect users to interact with your product or service, that also drives the duration question. Yeah.
If you're just doing two samples, you want to test and you have an existing network. Is there any advantage of doing A/B testing simultaneously versus I just have a new version of what I've pushed that out there and let it run for a month and get your feedback. And if it doesn't turn out to be beneficial, you just roll back to your previous version. A lot simpler.
Yeah, it is definitely simpler, and this is where that kind of cost-benefit question comes into play. So you gain the benefit of simplicity, but what you lose is the potential for other variables to impact your results. So let's say that you are selling outdoor perennial plants, and we have the worst drought that we've had in 20 years, and plant sales suck. And the drought hit like halfway through your trial deployment. Then like, what are you going to do? So holding those other variables constant is how you're going to get the most direct answer that really proves causality. but it's not worth it in every case. But sometimes it is. Yeah.
I'll add on to that a little bit. If your experiment is like horrible, you can always turn off your feature flags, go back to your control. But if you ship your product as an experiment, you would have to keep it going somehow.
Yeah, that's a great point too, is that with feature flags, remotely controlled feature flags, you have control over when, okay, this has been a disaster, we need to get out of here as soon as we can, and there's a lot of power in that, being able to kind of manage feature release separate from product release. These are great questions, guys. I'm impressed for 4:30 in the afternoon. Any others? Well, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of Minibar.